Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know if I am audible. Am I audible? Hello. Hello, am I audible? Okay, I think there's a response. All right, great. All right. Thank you very much. So I'm audible. We are live. Thank you very much for joining us again this evening. It is, I think, the fourth. Is it the fourth or the fifth? Yeah, today we are taking the fifth installment of our course. And we are looking at personal morality and leadership. Personal morality and leadership. If it's possible to share this, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and do that, because today's topic is starting to get to the very heart of what a lot of Christians struggle with. We're looking at personal morality and leadership. In very simple terms, we are trying to find out the relationship between the personal morality of a leader and then their leadership responsibilities. Now, the idea, so that I can set the tone, the idea that we are trying to deal with is that as Christians, in trying to make political choices and decisions, how do we rate the personal morality of political aspirants vis-a-vis their, what you might call, competence in office? Or when someone is already been elected into a political position, is in an elective office, how do we determine how much support we give to that person, particularly in terms of the way the person runs his or her life personally? So that's what we call personal morality, and the way that they discharge the actual functions or the duties and responsibilities of their office. So if you still don't get that, as we start to discuss the issues, you will see exactly why this is a very critical issue. So you can pick up the web link to this broadcast and share it somewhere on Facebook, on your WhatsApp status, wherever else you know how to share this. And let's have this conversation. Now, as we go on in today's class, I'll be open to taking questions from as many people as might have questions. We're looking at personal morality and leadership. Okay, I will be using maybe two examples, basically. One of them from Nigeria, the other one from the United States of America. But most of the time, my example will still be coming. Yeah, I think I will be touching different places, actually, come to think of it. All right. So, political office holders do have responsibilities that are incidental to the office that they hold. So when somebody is elected, into a political office, maybe as president, as governor, as senator, as local government chairman, as House of Assembly member, or even generally in other kinds of positions, like the vice chancellor of a university, like the executive secretary of a government agency. Those are positions to which people are not elected, but they are also appointed. Now, we are looking at faith and politics, so much of our focus is going to be positions that people have attained through the political process, but it's the same thing basically in leadership. We are looking at personal morality and leadership. To say, for a Christian, for instance, if you are trying to determine who to vote for, you are trying to determine who to vote for, what would be the major issues that you are looking at? Would the major issues be the personal morality of the contestants, or your understanding of competence, to say who is going to be the most competent president, who is going to be the most competent governor? Now, the third way to look at this is to not bifurcate. So we can simply say, well, why do we need to choose between personal morality and competence in leadership? Why can't we have both? And I'm going to say, yes, that is what we should be looking for. We should be looking for both personal morality and competence in leadership. But we do not live in a perfect world. So, were we to be in a perfect world, that is exactly what we are going to have to go for. It would be definitely both personal morality, that is very high up there, and then competence in leadership, that is also very high up there. But we live in a fallen world. So as people who live in a world that is not perfect, and the world is not perfect partly because human beings who inhabit the world are not perfect. And because we are not perfect, every now and again you are going to have a certain level of imbalance in terms of how much personal morality is this person bringing on the table, and how much competence is this person bringing on the table. This became a very topical issue, at least lately, because of the scenario in the United States of America. A situation where it looked like a lot of evangelical Christians seem to be supporting the current president, Donald Trump, yet there is a lot that is out there in the public space that does not speak very well to a life of personal morality that is exemplary, so that whether true or false, but I mean, there are good reasons. Even sometimes his demeanor and his courage and the language that he uses. And then you could even look at his personal life to say, okay, morally speaking, what kind of life has he led in the past? He has been around Playboy, he has been into fashion shows, not just fashion shows, beauty pageants, and all kinds of things that a Christian would not normally embrace, that a Christian would not normally want to endorse, and that Christians really do not endorse. But you see that going on in the life of this person, rightly or wrongly, truthfully or falsely, and there is a level of truth to it, actually. There's no way to completely say everything that has been said about him is false, especially that we have already made the point that human beings are not perfect. Now, on the other hand, you see evangelicals who ordinarily do not endorse in the kind of lifestyle that this person is said to lead, still supporting the person as president and probably campaigning for him, and on and on. So the question becomes, how is it convenient for Christians, for instance, to know all of the things that are morally questionable and or even reprehensible that the president does, and at the same time go ahead to endorse him, to support him. How do they combine it? How is that possible for them? So that's to put the topic in context very practically. So when we're talking about personal morality and leadership, this is what we are looking at. That at the personal level, there's a certain way somebody lives their lives, but in terms of the obligations of the office that they hold, there are certain demands and responsibilities that come with that office. And we have seen that it is the case that someone could be competent to a large extent in discharging the official responsibilities and duties of the position to which they've been appointed, but isn't exemplary in their personal morality, in their personal moral lives. There could be a lot of things that are not directly required by law, but these are matters of good faith, good behavior, ethics, morality that ordinarily you would expect that a leader who holds such a high political or elective position would be exemplary in those moral areas. But sometimes we have situations where you have high morality and very low competence. Sometimes you have high competence, very low morality. And rarely, occasionally, but possibly, you do have high morality and high levels of competence. So the issue is this. In an ideal world, we will not be having this conversation because the answer will be very straightforward. We would insist that whoever our leader is must be impeccable in terms of their personal morality, and then they must also be stellar in terms of their competence to lead. That is basically what we want. And that's what every Christian would naturally opt for. But were that not to be possible, or where that is not possible, what should a Christian do? How should a Christian process political decision, political choice making? How should a Christian go about it? That is essentially what we are trying to look at today. So I hope that that sets the stage for our discussion, for our conversation today. All right. Having set that laid that basic foundation, I want to tease out a few things now. Number one is to say, if somebody is elected into political office, there are specific responsibilities in a democracy, constitutional democracy. There are specific responsibilities normally that are captured in the Constitution, which are supposed to provide a framework for the exercise of the office. And that also provides the framework for evaluating the performance of the person who holds that office. That's what the case is. So you have a president in a country like Nigeria, you have a president in a country like the United States of America, and wherever else they have constitutional democracy, or at least some kind of pretensions to constitutional democracy. Now, those things that are required constitutionally would be the bare bone of the infrastructure or of the structure that we use, the framework that we use to evaluate the performance of whoever is in that office. The constitutional requirement or stipulation would be naturally the baseline in deciding, oh, is this a good president or has he not performed well? And in terms of personal morality, a lot of nation's constitution wouldn't go to great lengths to delineate what kind of moral integrity, personal morality, I mean, in that case, a leader is supposed to have. Because it is almost taken for granted that if somebody was going to be elected into such a political position, baseline, they will come with a certain level of acceptable personal morality to even qualify to vie for the office in the first place. Those kinds of assumptions are made every now and again by the constitution of every nation that runs a constitutional system. But we now know that that is not always true, or that is not always obtainable in reality. So, the first example I mentioned, which is the situation in the United States of America, this is precisely the situation that has played out and that is still playing out. It is that it looks like a lot of Christians support a man who does not seem to be living out values that are highly cherished in terms of personal morality within the Christian community. Maybe this person is a polygamist. It's not just a polygamist. He's made all kinds of statements about his what Christians would call an immoral lifestyle. We've heard him make comments that has been broadcast or that has been leaked out that would really make a Christian to cringe in terms of the moral deficiencies that those kinds of statements exhibit. Now, when somebody is that kind of person, and at the same time, many Christians seem to be supporting the person, you now start to ask the question, why is it so? What is the reason for that level of support that the person gets from the Christian community despite not living a life that Christians ordinarily would endorse at the personal morality level? So there are two things that we need to now get straight. Number one is this, and this is speaking basically from history, and then a bit of logic, as it were, just plain common sense, is to say that as Christians, we know that we live in a broken world, a world that is not perfect, which means that we are not always going to have Christians in positions of political leadership or in government offices. We are not always going to have people that are Christians occupy these positions. That's the first thing to say. But that does not mean that we therefore do not have a stake in terms of what we support or who we support. If Christians are only going to give their support to a political office holder only and if that political office holder is a professed Christian or is a confirmed believer, whatever that means, or lives a life of personal morality that completely accords with the expectation that we have of Christian leaders, then Christians are almost not going to be active politically across the nations of the earth, because there are very few countries in the world right now that you can say, oh, we have genuine believers or brothers in the Lord that are the leaders of those countries. So that's the first thing to say, that Christians are very aware that we live in a broken world, and that in a broken world with political systems that are not perfect themselves, because God is not a politician, God is not a democrat, God doesn't run a democracy. But democracy is become the most practicable system of government that I think fallen humanity has been able to bring to bear. Now, working within that kind of a system, we know that it's not perfect. So how do we make the best of an imperfect system? That's the position of the Christian, or that should be the position of the Christian, to say, how do we make the most of an imperfect system? Now, when you start to ask the question, how do we make the most of an imperfect system, then the Christian says to you, or at least the reasoning would be that, in terms of personal morality, we have high standards and we have high expectations from people in political or elected, from our elected officials. In terms of performance, competence in leadership competence, we also do have high expectations from them. But when it comes to moral example at the personal morality level, we would say that the church would not endorse immorality. The church would not endorse personal moral failures in the life of a leader, or the church will not gloss over them. That's what we really need to do, is to say that we call a spade, to say this person, in terms of personal morality, is not scoring high enough, or is not scoring that good. Now, if the church and Christians generally admit that, which is what we should do, then we are living up to really the demands both of scripture and of conscience. Because on the other hand, we cannot go on to say, yeah, this person morally, his life is questionable, but in terms of competence, this person is such a person that upholds values by the policies that they enact and that they support. They uphold values, or they have proposed policies, or they have actualized policies that line up with the belief system of Christians. So we would say, would prefer that this person was personal morality wise very high up there, and leadership competence wise very high up there. But if we cannot get both, especially in a situation where somebody's already been elected into an office, now this person is not giving us both, so what do? What do we prioritize? I think that's the real issue. What do we prioritize? Do we prioritize the personal morality of this politician that has been elected into office, irrespective of what his policies are, however good the policies are, however competent the person are? Or do we prioritize the competence of the person, and then more like, while we cringe, right, at their personal morality, we nevertheless can applaud their policies and, you know, their policy direction? This is really what it comes down to. And I think that the reasonable thing to do is to say, we would say that if policy wise this person is doing well, but personal morality wise this person is not doing well, we're going to give support to this person just in virtue of policy, and we are going to speak up against the personal morality deficits and failures in the life of the person. Now, the next thing would be to say, well, if you are speaking up against personal morality, what implication is that going to have? The implication that is going to have would be to say that the church continues in the public space to uphold the highest standards of personal morality, so that we are not saying it does not matter how this person lives his life or her life at the personal level, simply because this person is doing well in terms of the constitutional responsibilities that the person has. So we're not going to say that. But at the same time, we are also not going to say, because of the personal failures of this person in terms of personal morality, we don't care how good his policies are. And the reason why Christians shouldn't take that posture, I want to give you my thought on that. It is to say, number one, when it comes to personal morality, there are certain aspects of personal morality that are almost strictly a matter of Christian morality. They are things that you could almost call Christian morality. The moral life of a person at that personal level, there are certain demands that God lays upon people simply because they are believers. Sorry, I was saying that there are certain responsibilities and expectations that God expects from people because they are Christians. And if somebody were not to be a Christian, it may not be appropriate to expect the same level of morality from the person. So, in the church, the Bible is very clear that as Christians, we are supposed to be exemplary in terms of our personal morality. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So everyone that is a Christian is expected to live a life that is above reproach, generally speaking. But the Bible has very specific instructions that are supposed to form qualification for the people that will be made elders, pastors, bishops within the church, or even for those that would be appointed as deacons in the church. And it is because the office of the bishop, the elder, or the pastor, whichever translation you are using, is an office, is a position of leadership in the church. So you start to hear things like, if somebody desires the office of a bishop or of a pastor, he desires a good work. And then it now goes on to say, a pastor therefore must be. And then there is a set of criteria that is now given. So for instance, it says he has to be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. He has to be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. All right? There isn't anything here that would be inappropriate for just any believer. All right? There isn't anything here that would be inappropriate for just any believer. Paul, writing to Timothy, for instance, says, this is a true saying, if a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless. We are seeing those qualifications again. The husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy or filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that rules well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man knows not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, which are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. He goes on to say, likewise must the deacons be grave, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy of filthy lucre, holding the mystery of faith in a pure conscience. And let these also first be proved. Then let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderer, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husband of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. For they that have used the office of a deacon well purchase to themselves a good degree and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. So you can see that the Bible is pretty very strict and very, very precise in terms of the prescription for, or the qualification for leadership in the church. You can't be a leader in the church, or you can't be a pastor, an elder, or a bishop, which basically refer to the same office, and a deacon just simply because you are a Christian. All right? So, for the Christian, personal morality, personal integrity, all of those things are very important, but the Christian is also aware that these are requirements that are very, very specific as far as the scriptures are concerned. They are very specific to those that are leaders within the church. It is not appropriate, in my view, to expect the same level of personal integrity and morality from people that are elected into political positions. Number one, some of them may not even be Christians, all right? Some of them may not be Christians, and whatever religious system they subscribe to may differ with Christianity on certain issues, like issues of polygamy, right? How many wives can a man get married to? If you're a Christian, you want to be in Christian leadership, you absolutely cannot be a polygamist. You can't be a practicing polygamist and be a pastor. That is very clear in scripture. But when it comes to political office holders, those political office holders, they are not the example in terms of moral conduct and behavior for the church. We don't look to the president in order to derive the moral example by which we run our lives or by which we teach morality. We in the church, the setup is completely different. God intends that leaders in the church must be people that are both competent in leadership and are of high personal moral integrity. For the church, there is no compromise. For the church, is absolutely important. But to expect now that because this is what we expect from our leaders in the church, that if we are supporting somebody out there who is not a church leader, but is a leader in the secular setting or in a democracy, a politician basically that's been elected into office, to now expect that we as Christians must apply the same principle and standard that we apply to leaders within the church, to politically elected leaders, in order to be able to decide whether we support them or not, I think is wrong-footed. And sometimes these things are used just simply to bully the church into a certain corner, or basically just to silence the church, because it doesn't make sense. There's nothing that says that we are going to have political leaders that their personal morality is going to be impeccable and then they are going to be very competent. Yet, there is also nothing that says that if we do not get that, then we cannot give any level of support. What I think the church needs to do is to continue to insist that what is wrong, no matter where it is found. But at the same time, to continue to say that what is good, and that when we elect people into these elective offices as president, governors, whatever, we expect and we hope that they are people that live a life that is exemplary in terms of their moral lives at the personal level, That is almost supposed to be taken for granted. But like we have said already, it is a world that is not perfect. So what we would say would be that as the church, we have an allowance that says those that are elected into political offices, there's a constitution that delineates the extent of their responsibility to the people that they are elected to lead. And so long as they are working fairly within the construct of the Constitution, that should be the primary way that we judge them, that we evaluate them. Number two is to say, in terms of public policy, the policies that best accord with Christian convictions, Christian ethics, and Christian beliefs, whoever is the president that is pushing those policies would be the first thing to consider, to say, all right, this is a broken world. We're not going to have a perfect president. We're not going to have a perfect governor. So as the church, what should we be looking out for? And I think historically and commonsensically, what the church has decided to do, which is, well, maybe not what the church has always done, but if you're looking at the American experiment, for instance, I think when Jimmy Carter was elected president, a lot of people were excited, and by a lot of people I'm talking about Christians, a lot of believers were excited because Jimmy Carter was a self-professed Christian that was a member of, I think, the Southern Baptist Convention or something like that. He was a Baptist, and he was a brother. I think he even had, some kind of responsibility in church. Maybe as a leader, Sunday school teacher, or something like that. I don't remember the detail. But Jimmy Carter was clearly a believer. And so the church was very excited when Jimmy Carter became president. But that excitement was not very long-lived because in terms of policy, he didn't have the best showing for a Christian. And so the church eventually was kind of disappointed. And I think Jimmy Carter doesn't have the best record in terms of policy, particularly from the standpoint of being a Christian. Now, that kind of experience is not an isolated experience. We've seen that happen in all kinds of settings. We have seen situations where somebody is elected as maybe executive secretary of a ministry, of an agency of government, and they go in there as believers, they go there and they live there as believers, which means that they are not going to womanize, they are not going to embezzle public funds, they are not going to forge reports, or they are not going to be involved in corrupt practices while they are in office. But for many of them, many of the time, that's about as much as you can say. But you see, the point is that nobody is made the executive secretary to not be corrupt. That's not why you are made the executive secretary. For instance, you are not made executive secretary of an agency of government to not be corrupt. You are not made executive secretary to not embezzle public funds. That's not why you are made. You are made executive secretary of an agency of government to do certain things, positively, all right? To improve certain aspect of the government influence or the government intervention in society. That is the reason why you are elected or made executive secretary, for instance. It does not mean that means that you should embezzle funds, you should be corrupt. No, I'm just simply saying that in terms of the terms of reference, that why do we elect or select, appoint an executive secretary, it's not really like necessary to say for him to not embezzle public funds. That is taken for granted. For instance, if you embezzle all the money that is meant for the agency, then what are you going to use to execute the responsibilities and the duties of the agency, right? So why it is not that people in elective positions or political leaders are supposed to be corrupt? The point is that the reason why they're in the office is not primarily to not be corrupt. That's not why they are there. There are very clear deliverables that are stipulated by whatever the laws are that validate that office, and those deliverables are supposed to be the thing primarily by which the office holder is judged. So as the president is a constitution. For some other people, there's an act that sets up the agency that you head. If you are the vice chancellor of a university, for instance, you are not made vice chancellor to not cheat people or to not be tribalistic. It is not to not be those things. That's not why you are made vice chancellor. For instance, you are made vice chancellor to do certain things. We have seen people that have gotten into offices, all right, like the remote example of Jimmy Carter that I was giving. And it could very well be the case that in terms of personal morality, they score very high, but they are incompetent, absolutely incompetent, such that there is really nothing that they are doing that strikes a strong chord in the heart of the people in terms of the deliverables of the office. So the only thing they have maybe is personal integrity. Like, oh, that person, all the while that he was in government, he was never corrupt, he didn't cheat anybody, he did not embezzle government funds, he could not even build a house for himself. No problem. All of that is okay. But those are not the reasons for which you were put in the office. You were put in the office by the exercise of competent leadership, to be able to bring certain changes and to be able to offer certain dividends to people or to the society, whatever the demography is or the constituency that the office that you have been elected into is meant to serve. Those are the ways that we judge whether somebody is good or somebody is not good in their office. In church, it wouldn't be so. In church, if you fail the personal morality test, we really don't care how competent you are as an administrator to be able to administer or to administrate the church and the administrative duties or responsibilities of running a church or whatever it is as a deacon. It wouldn't matter. That's why you see those passages we read tells us very much that if somebody is going to be a pastor or a deacon, they have to have these qualifications, and those qualifications are basically ethical and moral in nature. So it has to do with personal morality. So it is not that the church is trying to use double standard. It is the case that the church is trying to apply the appropriate standard to different categories. A governor is not a pastor. A president is not a bishop. Now, the Bible tells us also in Romans chapter 12, Romans chapter 13, I beg your pardon. All right. Now, in Romans chapter 13, the Bible tells us that in verse 3, for instance, I want to read from the ESV. In Romans chapter 13, it says, "For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience." So, you see that the Bible basically talks to us about the responsibility of public office holders. You know, that's what this is. And it is that they are God's servant for our good. If we do wrong, we need to be afraid, because the ruler does not bear the sword in vain. He is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. This is why we have these people. They are supposed to serve in civil matters for the maintenance of law and order, for the flourishing of society. When it comes to personal morality, our best examples are not going to be politicians. They are not going to be political office holders. But don't get me wrong, like I said from the start, ideally, we will be gunning for both high personal morality, high leadership skills, and competence. But if we can't get both, it is within reason that we would want to endorse more or tilt more towards the person who is competent, even if at the private personal moral level, they are not exemplary at all. Because when it comes to exemplary lifestyle in personal morality, we have leaders in the church for that purpose. And those leaders in the church are first and foremost judged along that line, even before they are made leaders. And if they are leaders and they are falling short of that standard, there's a procedure also by which they may be relieved of their offices, no matter how competent they have become. So it's very different, except that sometimes, both as Christians or even as non-Christians, there is this pressure to want to ask the church in general to apply rules that are supposed to specifically be applicable to church leaders, to political office holders, so that when it looks like the church is not doing that, there is a tendency to start to charge the church with being hypocritical or using some kind of double standard to say, how could you ever support a man like that? How could you support a polygamist? Or how could you support somebody that, cheated on his wife, or whatever that moral failure in the life of the person might be? The issue is that Christians in general who would support such a person, they don't do it because of their personal morality. They are doing that because these people are advancing policy positions that are consistent with the beliefs of Christians. So it is in terms of public policy that they decide to support, not because they endorse the private moral failures, personal failures in terms of morality that are in the lives of the person. What I think the church needs to be able to do with more clarity and balance is how to be unapologetically strong in their denunciation of the things that are not right in the lives of political office holders who may be advancing policies that we like and support as Christians, who may be competent in leadership, but may be failing very glaringly in personal morality. It is not enough just simply to say, well, nobody is perfect. Yeah, we know nobody is perfect. Even in the church, we know that nobody is perfect. Yet, there is a certain baseline that somebody needs to meet in terms of personal morality before they are made elders or pastors and bishops or even deacons. It doesn't mean that elders, pastors, and deacons are perfect, but it does mean that there is a baseline, there's a requirement, there's a moral standard that if they fall below, they do not qualify to be put into that office. So we shouldn't just brush everything away with that slogan of say, show me a man that is perfect. Oh, if you are the perfect one, cast the first stone. No, because when we do that, it starts to look like we are endorsing both the moral failures in the personal life of the person as much as we are endorsing the person's good performance in terms of policy and leadership competence. There is nothing that stops you from saying this person's personal morality is despicable, all right? It is completely reprehensible, but policy-wise, he's doing very well. And he is precedent for these reasons. The primary obligations of the president is not to provide us an example in terms of personal morality, not because it is not expected or even required, but it's not the primary responsibility of the president. That's not why we elect presidents. When we elect presidents, we are electing people to perform certain constitutional role or public policy roles. When we are looking for personal morality examples, we look at Christian leaders primarily that God is giving to us, and then we look at Christian parents. We look at, we look within the church. It is in virtue of being a Christian that we express those kinds of expectations. And so even if somebody is a Christian and now they hold a political office, we must still understand that when we are trying to evaluate them as political office holders, we should be doing that first through the lens of the leadership demands, the public policy and leadership demands of the office, to say, is this person a competent chairman, local government chairman? Is this person a competent governor? Is this person a competent president? In Nigeria, we had an election some years ago, and we're told that the person that was being advanced at the time had so much integrity, so much integrity, so much integrity. The only thing that basically the person ruled on in terms of campaigns and all of that was integrity. Oh, I'm not corrupt. I'm not going to eat your money. Corruption is everywhere. We need to kill corruption. And there was a whole argument in terms of this man is such an astute, whatever, frugal person who does not have any house outside of, they told us all kinds of things. And that's the current president. And that talk about integrity, of his personal integrity, he keeps this, he keeps that, he doesn't have a lot of money, he's frugal, he's not a polygamist or whatever. All of that was seemingly appealing at the time, because they were contrasting it with what was thought to be the corruption of the incumbent government at the time. And fair comparison. But some of us also kept saying that personal integrity, very important, but it's not enough. Because as governor or as president, you may not embezzle public funds. But if you are not a competent leader, public funds will be embezzled right under your nose. You will not know, and you will not have enough to be able to do the things that you are supposed to do in office. If you don't have the courage, if you don't have the competence, if you don't have the know-how to run a government, personal integrity is not going to be enough. Personal integrity is important, but I'm saying that it is not enough. And I don't think that anybody can argue with that anymore. In fact, right now, even the whole talk about the existence of personal morality is now something that is debatable, because that integrity that was touted and that was one of the major things that was used to sell the current president to Nigerians, it doesn't look like a lot of Nigerians are seeing the impact of that integrity in the life, that the quality of life that we now have to live. The deliverables of democracy do not seem to be coming to us as much as you'd have expected. And that's not because, first and foremost, people are now saying, oh, he doesn't have integrity anymore, or he's embezzling public funds. There are many people that are still saying, oh, this man will not embezzle public funds, he's not corrupt at the personal level, yet he isn't performing. So right now it's obvious that if he doesn't have the integrity that we think he has, and he is doing like twice in terms of the actual duties of the office of the president, we will be in a better place than we are right now, all right? Because it's now obvious that personal integrity alone is not enough. Important as it isn't enough. So in Nigeria, we have almost like a reverse of the kind of thing that seemingly is the situation in the United States of America, where you have a president that does not have the best of record in terms of personal morality and all that. But as far as the church is concerned, this president is pro-life. This president has stood by those that are persecuted because of their religious commitment. And it's not just Christian persecution, it is persecution almost everywhere that it is found. He has spoken very strongly in support of Muslims that were persecuted in China, against China who was doing the persecution. He has spoken also very forthrightly about Christian persecution around the world. And within the American country, as it were, his own immediate constituency, he has taken a very bold and strong stand in support of the pro-life movement, the pro-life agenda. He has stood with people who are fighting for religious liberties and liberty of conscience. So the whole LGBTQ movement and the way that they want to overstep the boundaries in terms of forcing people to engage in speech that people find to be inappropriate or reprehensible on religious grounds. So like asking somebody to bake a cake and write something across the cake that is supposed to be affirming, gay lifestyle and gay practices, while the person, for religious reasons, do not believe in those kinds of ideals. All right? So this is a precedent in the United States that at the level of personal morality may not be doing so well, but in terms of public policy has stood by policies or has espoused policies. He has appointed people to the Supreme Court that are conservative in their leaning, which is something that the church would want, all right? So it is because of policies like that and these kinds of position that people seem to be supporting the president of the United States of America, even though these people are Christians who ordinarily will not endorse somebody whose personal morality is not exemplary. Now, in Nigeria, we have what is like the reverse of the American situation. We have a man who became president on the wings of so much talk of personal integrity and frugality and, personal responsibility and discipline. He will not waste our money. They said all kinds of things, all right, about him. But all of that was basically matters of personal morality. But we're not planning to elect a pastor. We're not planning to elect a bishop over Nigeria. We're planning to elect a president. The president has constitutional roles and responsibilities that are spelled out. So we talk about things like security being the number one responsibility of the executive leader over the country or the executive governor over his state. Now, somebody can be a polygamist, somebody can be, a womanizer and bring the full weight of the apparatus of government to bear upon perpetrators of evil and wickedness and mayhem over a society. And that would be appropriate because that's part of what he was elected to do. He was elected to provide leadership that helps us to be able to live a life that is fair, a life that is free of fear, and to live a life that is peaceable in the language of Scripture. So, if you have somebody that is personally deficient in their morality, personal, private morality, but they are doing very well in terms of public policy, in terms of leadership competence, it is not surprising that that's where Christians are going to go. Especially that we know that this is not a perfect world. And in an imperfect world, you are not going to always have everything put for you on the table the way you would want to have it. If we want to apply rules that are Christian rules or moral standards that are properly Christian morality, if we want to apply all of that onto just everybody, that is not only unfair, that is wrong. It's actually wrong. There are certain things that God expects from you only because you are a Christian. And then there are certain things that God expects from you just because you are human. And like we've read, there are even certain things that are specifically mandatory if you must be a leader of certain sort within the church. It doesn't mean that if you are not a pastor, elder, or you are not a bishop, or you are not a deacon, it will now be wrong for you to have all of those qualities that we are told that pastors must have, because according to scriptures, you have to have those qualities before you are even made an elder or a deacon or a pastor or bishop. So we are saying, however, that the Bible does agree that everybody that is called by the name of Jesus, for instance, is supposed to be someone of very high moral standard in terms of their personal morality. But the Bible also does say that for those that will be leaders in the church, specifically, the bar is quite high. Now, that high bar is not requirement for salvation. It's not requirement for going to heaven. It is that if you must be a leader within the church, these are the qualifications you need to have. But what does the Bible really expect from political office holders? That's what we read in Romans chapter 13. Is basically the maintenance of public order, public peace, public law, and justice, so that those that are law-abiding can live a life that is free of fear. You don't have to be afraid. If you are law-abiding, if you stay within the confines of legitimate civil laws, that you shouldn't be afraid of anything. But that if you are not law-abiding, then you should be afraid, because the public office holder, the governor, the president, for instance, the ruler in the language of scripture, has the sword. He is a bearer of the sword, and he does not bear that sword in vain. Says scriptures, he bears that sword to be able to execute judgment and justice on those that do wrong. And this is what he does more like for God, because in the New Testament, the admission is that God has decided to separate civil governance from spiritual leadership, so that we no longer run a theocracy in order to be Christians. So Christianity therefore can flourish no matter the political system or the system of government that a country runs, because civil leadership and spiritual leadership have now been separated. And God says, according to Romans 13, that the government person, the leader, the ruler, all right, is God's minister for the enforcement of justice, judgment, and equity in society. That these people are in position to ensure that we have a civil society where people that are doing good and are law-abiding can move freely and live a peaceable life without being afraid, and where people that are not living right in terms of the civil space or civil behavior and public accepted norms of behavior, people that are not living right, scripture says they should be afraid, because the governor or the ruler exists and he has the sword, he has authority in order to bring justice into human situations. So you see that it's very clear from scripture that the Bible expects certain kinds of responsibilities from political office holders, and it is basically the maintenance of law and order, punishing wrongs, and basically affirming that which is right. But when it comes to Christian leaders, we are also clearly told the way that it must work within the church. In fact, the church talks a whole lot about personal morality and all that, and personal integrity. So, in essence, what we've said tonight is that in terms of personal morality and leadership, number one, we want to have leaders that score very high in personal morality and that score very high in leadership competence. But number two, because this is an imperfect world, we may not always have it like that. And if we do not, what should Christians prioritize in choosing political leaders or electing political officers? Should we prioritize personal morality over leadership competence if we have to make that unfortunate choice? And my proposal is, and from the testimony of history, is that, well, generally Christians, for good reasons, normally would now choose to go with the person that we score highest in terms of their competence in leadership to be able to deliver to people the dividends of democracy, or the dividends of governance. And then it's almost the way that sometimes you close your eyes to take certain medication, right? There's a sense in which you don't like the appearance of what it is, or sometimes it's even the taste of the medication that you do not like. But you are going to swallow it because, yeah, I don't like the taste, but it's, in the end, it's good for my body. It's that kind of thing. So there are people that we support them while almost blocking our nostrils to say there's some kind of foul smell that is coming out of this place, but this person will get the specific job for which they are being elected. He will get the job done. And the third thing I said is that Christians must be very clear about what they affirm and about what they denounce, so that we don't leave people in doubt as to what we are supporting. That we have to be clear on the fact that policy-wise this person is doing well, but personal morality is reprehensible, and that there's no contradiction in saying we will vote for this person, for instance, because of his policy, even though we abhor his personal morality. And then I think the final thing to say on that wise is that the responsibility of living a life that is exemplary is mandatory for Christian leaders, all right? Is mandatory for Christian leaders, but it is expected of every leader, but it is mandatory for Christian leaders. The other example I wanted to use from the Nigerian space, and maybe I can do that within the next 2 minutes because I want to bring this class soon to a close, is part of something that happened recently, in the Nigerian space, all right? Nigerian Twitter space, I mean to say. Just a minute. All right. So there was, during the NSAS protest, there were a couple of people that participated and that gave their support. So it was the case that Pastor Sam Adeyemi had been quite vocal in his support of the ideals that the NSAS protest people were trying to advance, at least in those early stages, which is basically to say end police brutality, reform the police, and then give some kind of reparation to those that have suffered at the hands of police. So basically, he made a couple of posts on Twitter that was supportive and that helped to give some kind of direction, as it were, to the protest or to the protesters. And very popular person also on Twitter, Adekunle Gold. So Adekunle Gold said, Along, I foresee give Pastor Sam one cold beer, but, all right? So he says, I would have said, give Pastor Sam Adeyemi one cold beer, but. And then Pastor Sam replies, he replies to the tweet and say, AG, that is Adekunle Gold, lead us not into temptation. Oh. Then he now say, how chilled is it? No, don't worry. Thanks a lot. Now, you could tell it was kind of light-hearted, but you can see that why Pastor Sam Adeyemi is generally held up to be a leadership expert, apart from being a pastor and all that. because he's a pastor, there's a general belief and knowledge that he is also a teetotaler. That means he does not take alcohol. And but he has said something really, really interesting, something really affirming, and the young people were very happy. So somebody said, I would have said, give Pastor Sam one chilled bottle of beer, but essentially saying, but I'm not going to say so. All right, I foresee give Pastor Sam one cold beer, but, and then he doesn't end the statement, basically saying, but I'm not going to say so. Why? Because Pastor Sam is a leadership expert, is someone that is blazed the trail in terms of leadership and is known for that within our space. But at the personal level also, it was obvious to Adekunle Gold that a bottle of beer wouldn't be the best way to appreciate Pastor Sam. But if it was somebody else, there wouldn't have been any but. It would have been say, oh, please give this man a bottle of beer, all right? Because of who you know the person to be. Now, give this person a bottle of beer is not because they are leaders or they are not leaders. It is because you know that at that personal morality level, these people do not forbid alcohol. They take alcohol. But you know that the other person, at that personal level, they obviously do not take alcohol. There is a clear difference between that personal conviction in terms of personal morality and their leadership possibilities and competences. And that's what you see in the Adekunle Gold versus Sam Adeyemi's story. It was a very interesting thread on Twitter during that period, particularly that it was a very tensed period as we went through the whole trauma and ordeal and the protests and the uncertainty that greeted it. This was one light moment, one light-hearted moment, but it holds a lot of lessons in terms of this difference between personal morality and leadership competence. That there are leaders that have certain competences, and at the personal level, there are also certain values that they uphold. Those values are one thing. Personal morality is another thing. And I'm saying that in terms of politics and how we think of people that we put into elective positions, we should want to have people that have high personal moral standards and that also have high leadership competence. But where we can't get both, then we should be looking for people that can deliver on the clearly stated objectives of the office that we are trying to vote people into, and then concentrate on being the kinds of moral examples that we want the world to see as pastors, as deacons, as bishops, as parents, and generally as Christians, so that we do not insist on seeing Christian morality in the life of a person before we can support them for a political office. If there are any questions, we can take them now. Otherwise, it would be a good place to call it a day. Example or even comments from those of you that have been following. And let me know if you have any confusions or if there's any comprehension type question, or if there's any observation that you have made and you want to call our attention to it. You can do that right about now in the next 1 minute before we call it a day. All right, if there's anything on MixLR or there's anything on YouTube, let's get to it. YouTube, where is it? All right. Any? None. All right. So there's no question. So if there are no questions, then we just draw the curtain on today's class here. I want to thank every one of you for joining us today. I hope that we would see again next week, Monday. The feed on YouTube is still a little bit behind, so maybe. All right, I don't think there are any questions. Okay, I think I can confirm that now. I don't think there are any questions. No questions so far. Okay. Somebody's asking that we should check the email. Yeah, what's all right? We will check the mailbox. I hope you. All right. Thank you very much. God bless you, and see you again on Monday.